Welcome to this video demo for dodging and burning. And if you've done darkroom photography either here at Phoenix College or at another institution or even in high school or years ago, you're familiar with the concept of dodging and burning. And if you're not, it's a technique used a lot of time in the darkroom where you're manipulating the exposure of a selected area to either activate more exposure, more time under the exposure unit, and then hiding part of it or burning while we're getting more exposure in parts of it. Essentially, dodging will decrease the exposure of areas of print you want to be lighter, and burning increases the areas you want to be darker. So it would be more time in the exposure unit, which makes the thing darker. Think about when you're exposing your camera, the longer time the shutter is open, the more light, the darker it's going to be. So that's where the terms are going to come in. We've kind of playing around with the adjustment layers before, kind of playing around with the adjustment brush, with the masking with the adjustment brush. But this is another way to think about it within dodging and burning, to really get your print from point A to point B. And we're looking at a few different methods. So we have this photograph of my friend's dog. You can take any photograph you've shot, maybe one that you think just needs a little bit more pizzazz. So I did a Command J or Control J to duplicate this layer because we're going to show using the Dodge and Burn tool. So the Dodge and Burn tool is kind of down the line. Keyboard shortcut O for, oh my gosh, it's dodging and burning. This one isn't actually, a lot of times they're simple, like C for cut and P for pen tool, but this one is B for brush. This one is not, doesn't make sense, but O for, oh my goodness, you're going to dodge and burn. Maybe that will help you remember. So if you take the Dodge tool and you look at your control panel, you have the brush size because it uses the brush tool. You can adjust the range, the exposure. You can do an airbrush built up. And if you're using a drawing tablet, you can use pressure for size if you're using a drawing tablet. So I'm just going to do a Command plus to zoom in. And if I'm using my Dodge tool, I want an area where I want to be lighter. So I can take parts of this dog's fur. And when you use the airbrush, it does kind of take a minute, which is why we have that spinning friend. But if you notice, it kind of will just, it works, but you know, it kind of does it a different way. So if we take the same one and we do, you know, a burn tool, it's going to darken things and it actually kind of muddies things up. I typically don't recommend using the Dodge and Burn tool this way because number one, it is destructive editing. I'm physically adjusting these pixels, and let's say I save and close it, open it up again, and I'm like, you know what, this is gross. I don't like this. I can't do anything about it because I've destructively changed my pixels. I can never go back unless I go to my original image and edit it and then take all that work. So working this way is really difficult. And this is why I don't recommend using these destructive dodge and burn techniques. So I'm going to take this layer and I'm just going to take it to my trash can to delete. We're going to look at another way to non-destructively work. So I always make copies of layers just in case. You can too if you want. But we're going to create a new layer. So I'm going to do a Shift Command N. And if you're using a PC, you might use Shift Control N. N as in Nancy or N as in new layer. It's going to open up this dialog box. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the mode not from normal, but over to overlay. These are your blending modes. And you're going to click fill with overlay neutral color, 50% gray. This creates a new layer, but it's gray, it's neutral. And using those same dodge and burn tools, I can say, you know what, I want to burn this part here. And we're still using those tools. Remember those left and right brackets, those hard brackets, not squiggly, which are to the right of the P on your keyboard. You can make your brush bigger or smaller. And this way, if we work, I'm going to do a little bit of dodging. I might want to brighten up some of that fur. And again, I'm not really spending a ton of time. I'm just trying to show you, what we can do. And it really, adjusting these small highlights, again, this might be a little much. You might even want to take the exposure down, or even say, I want to adjust just the highlights. Ooh, that wasn't good. Command Z. Maybe this halo here. Burn. And kind of make that a little softer. I'm going to hide this layer, and you can see I'm making all of these changes on this layer. So I'm not affecting my original photograph, but only this layer. And you can see it's kind of quite drastic. There's another way where you can play around with the dodge and burn, not just the dodge and burn tools, but you can play around. So I'm going to just take maybe dodge and burn tools. I might just do that for an option. We'll make another gray layer, Shift Command N, and I might black, white brush, overlay, fill. And with this, we're actually going to use our brush tool. And if you play around with your brush tool a lot, you may want to, I might take, a soft one. And press D on your keyboard to default to black and white. And on this layer, anywhere you would paint black, let me make sure we're on that brush. And make sure on your brush, so anywhere you would paint black, it would darken. Anywhere you paint white would lighten. And I actually would take this opacity down just to lighten it up. So anything we're playing black, we're going to darken. And you can even make that brush a little bit smaller. But on this layer, you can see, you might even take it way down. And you can do X to alternate between highlights and shadows. So if I say, I want these highlights here, you can slowly kind of paint in, and that's going to actually add exposure, make things lighter, so it actually will overexpose, which it's kind of backwards when you think about it. I want these hairs to really pop out. So this is one way where you can have some dodging and burning in your image that's non-destructive. And this might be a little more helpful because then you can get real tiny and not worry about the dodging and burning so much, but just kind of painting something in like this. And if you are I think of this a little bit like when you're doing, if you've ever seen the makeup tutorials where people are contouring, where you're putting the darker mascara or the darker foundation in different parts and then the brighter foundation and blending it together to have that depth. It's kind of the same principle. And if I just hide this layer, you can see that I have all these little adjustments. And anything that's lighter than that gray, that mid-tone, that middle gray, will make it appear brighter, which, again, it's backwards because it takes away exposure, but it's making something look overexposed. You think about it in the darkroom to kind of flip those terms. And anything that's darker than that middle gray will darken, add exposure, slash underexposed. A lot of things are backwards in photography. So I'm going to hide that layer. And we're going to move over to adjustment layers and curves. Now we've kind of talked about this before. So with your adjustment layer, we're going to create a curves adjustment. And we're going to make a dodge, and that's where you're going to pull up. So in your middle of your curves layer, this is going to be your midtones, this is your shadows, and this is your blacks. Remember, this is your histogram, and then this is your highlights, and these are your whites. So overall, if you look at, you can kind of pull it up like so. And say, you know, this is how I want to do it. And if you click on this here that says mask, you can click invert. We'll leave it as is. We're going to do another curves adjustment layer. Take those shadows down. Click right here, which is that masking. Scroll down, and you can look at your the PDF and click invert. I want to click on our layers. So the second one we did was burning, and the first one is dodging. And this is why you want to rename your layers. So using this mask, remember we've played with a layer mask before. With that brush tool, anywhere where you paint white with your brush will reveal. So if I just do this really quick. See where it's all brighter now? Anywhere I play X will hide. So if I'm on this burning layer, remember I have to make sure this box is sort of highlighted. I can say, you know what, I want this fur. I want to do to default your colors in your foreground and background. X flips them back and forth. And B for your brush tool, your left and right brackets to increase and decrease size. I could say, you know what, I want this fur to kind of have that more of that texture. Now I haven't done any sharpening or anything, which you may want to do. And I can go to this dodging layer and say, you know what, I want this sort of mask to just pop. Now I'm being really kind of rough and dirty, but again, this is sort of playing around with how you can really kind of take different parts of your image and make it pop. A lot of time you do dodging and burning and you don't realize necessarily that you're dodging and burning. You're just using the adjustment layers and kind of pulling more things into the highlights to kind of pull it out. Remember when we look at an image and anything, the brightest thing in the scene we see first. So this right here is pretty bright. So I'm going to go to this burning layer and kind of darken part of this laptop because my eye is going to go to the brightest thing in this room. Even up here, so if I'm looking at this window, my eye goes here and not the dog. I can use on my burning layer to kind of darken in that window. And you can even see it's a little bit darker, and I might even and that raw image, use an adjustment brush to kind of really darken in that area. Because if it's so bright, I may not recognize the dog. So I might even go into my, just do an overall brighten. Because if he's the focus, he needs to be the brightest thing in the scene. Because I want my eye to go to there first and not to this window. So I went from this to that. It's a little bit very subtle change, but it really helps push what you can do with an image. And it's a lot of this extra post-processing. We work in Camera Raw or Lightroom, do a lot of work in there. Sometimes I do about 80% of my work there and do the final 20% in Photoshop to every image to make it really sing and pop. For your assignment, you really need to do one photograph of your own. And you're going to do a non-destructive method for dodging and burning. I want to see your layers to see what you've done. So when I open up the PSD, I want to see everything. So you'll need to save the PSD and the JPEG. The file naming conventions are in the handout. And I really want you to play around some of your images. Maybe one that just didn't quite sing the way you want it to. Do some dodging and burning to really push it to that next level to make that image stronger. So I hope this was really helpful. I'm going to post some other links about dodging and burning, and good luck.